Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ask if you could all just remain standing with me for a moment. I'm going to ask that we take a moment of silence for the Attleboro School, public school community lost a dear friend this weekend, Brett Lancaster, the father of Student Advisory Council Representative Aidan Lancaster and former Student Advisory Council members Harry Lancaster and Max Lancaster unexpectedly passed away over the weekend. In addition to being a father of 3 Student Advisory Committee members, he also was a great friend to the Attleboro Public Schools, so he certainly will be missed. Thank you. All right, welcome to the regular school committee meeting of Monday, April 8th, 2019. This is your reminder that this meeting is being electronically recorded. So at this time, we're going to start the meeting. We're starting a little early because as we do a couple times each year, we're going to recognize many of our student artists throughout the Attleboro Public Schools. We decorate our conference room with artwork created by our students to celebrate their creativity, and so we thank them for donating their work so it can decorate our walls. What I'm going to do is I'm going to name each of the students whose artwork is now hanging on our walls. I'll ask the students who are here to then go find their picture, and then a school committee member will be by to hand a certificate and for a photo opportunity if you'd like one. So from Attleboro High School, we have Janie Hillman, Dovandi Hongvithong, Tyler Novak McDonald, Leah Volpe, and Lorraine Webb. From Brennan Middle School, we have Sandra Isienga, Suri Ferguson, Hassan Palawa, and Addison Papagallos. From Coelho Middle School, we have Adrian Nottage, Rebecca Rainey. From Wamsutta Middle School, we have Kristen Moy, Robert Sawyer, and Addison Wells. From Hill Roberts Elementary School, we have Jabril Ismail. From Hyman Fine Elementary School, we have Donovan Moran. From Studley Elementary School, we have Nan No. From Willett Elementary School, we have Claire White. And from Thatcher, we have Geralis Rivera. So thank you to all the students.
I was gonna say, yeah, ours are all the way down the end.
Yeah, of course you can.
This is your gun here, right? Wonderful job, really good job. Thank you.
That's okay.
This is for you. Thank you very much. How are you?
That's true. I see the colors, it's awesome.
Is Rebecca here, Jim?
We're not.
Yes, I did.
This is my one, so, we haven't gotten there yet.
I'm gonna give that to Adrian and I'll take it.
Oh, yep, I think I just see. Oh.
Take it from everywhere.
Mr. Gilmore. Mr. Gilmore.
Andy?
We're doing a handshake.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. How many robots you put in? One right here, right? Is there a giant one?
That's all right. We got time. We got time.
I'm getting there.
We got time.
Getting there.
Your kids right after age off stage.
You know what? I think it might be.
Very welcome.
Exactly. I think we'll do it when we're done. Get them outside.
Okay. All right, I'm in your way. No.
Can I get a picture of you?
Fantastic. How you doing? Oh.
I know, this too. It probably needs for the Ron Williams. No, I mean, I just.
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
Come on, we need a picture with mom there too.
I'm a good friend of your mother's.
Okay.
Big fan of my Tyler. Can I take a picture of the two of you?
So that's what we got already. He's been saying I need a picture up on the wall for like a couple years now. So this is how we got around it. I see how it goes.
End of the album.
I knew I'd find you eventually. Which one's yours?
Thank you.
Congratulations. We love having the album.
You're good at this, yeah. Okay. All righty, thank you.
Awesome.
But I had to wait for my
Mr. Gilmore. Mr. Gilmore.
And of course you get here.
Good, I was hoping to squeeze in. Would you mind?
I would not mind at all.
Thank you so much.
I thought about it. I'm like, they're not done.
And $12 an hour for commissions. Don't forget to put that in. It's true.
They're not.
Fundraiser day.
Do what?
All right, how are you? He opens doors now.
Oh yes, Melissa was telling me with the windows, and I was like,
Oh yeah, he did that too.
I was like, we're gonna stay inside.
You know, we only have to.
Yeah, and then one time he figured out how the lock worked.
Yeah.
He moved that over because he wanted to get outside.
I'll just training kids out front.
Good to know.
That was promising.
A lot of fun.
We went to our meeting with our coffee. This is say it out loud, it's not a problem. We only got. I get something.
So good to see you.
Trace.
Probably now, huh? It's like one more month, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Do you know what are you doing next year?
I'm gonna go to Sacred Heart University.
You are
Connecticut, yeah.
great. That's so exciting.
I know.
Are you kids at Harvey?
Zip file.
I'm ready.
Yeah, this is the
This is
And the other.
it's just the presentation.
The other's just
Yeah,
the presentation.
definitely.
Okay.
Have a great night.
Under the finance, it's just dramatically different. Not pluralized if you look at the.
Following motion.
The Brennan students come forward. No, but they were talking about. There was a them coming to talk about. Mention that.
They had talked about it, but you can't take, well, nobody can respond to them, but sure, get back to them.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Yeah, with that, my kids, guys with that.
Yep.
They changed it to teaching them, let them have a tackle it.
Okay, next on our agenda tonight, we have our spotlight event, which, to introduce that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent, Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman. We're very excited today to bring you an update of our community engagement initiative, Be Heard. So I would ask that the presenting team come up and join us. I guess they were forced out into the hallway.
We got caught up. We were like,
Be heard,
we were going the wrong way in the hallway.
All right, they've been invited up.
Okay. So thank you for having us. We have several members from Be Heard, our community coalition, with us tonight. First, I'd just like to introduce two members that are here. They're our community coaches. One of them is Stephen Sell. He's from the Great Schools Partnership, and Richard Frieder. He is from Everyday Democracy. I will call up individual people as their time comes up. But I would just like to start off. Could I have the clicker? So I'm sure you've heard about Be Heard before, but actually I wanted to just take this time to let you all know what it is and how it started. So as part of our strategic plan Envisioning 2020, our vision is to be the center of the community where, united around education, where all stakeholders value the quality of education that we provide. And it started out of that, but I also would like to take a moment to thank Mr. Quinn for helping us to start this process to receive the actual grant for the Nellie Mae education, from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. So once we heard that we received this grant, we were able to pull together a group of community members, teachers, as well as students to participate in our first meeting. And from that moment on, we've continued to grow and put together an action plan, which is what we spent most of the year doing last year, to start to build our ability to include more members of our community into our having strong school and family partnerships and relationships, and to also provide our students and our community members more voice in some of the decisions that we make as a school system. So it is a 3-year grant, and last year, like I said, we wrote the action plan. This year, we're in the process of implementing that action plan, and we have also created a steering committee to support the sustainability of it. And next year, our goal is to continue with implementation and start thinking more about sustainability for that. So as part of the action plan, we have 3 distinct goals. Goal 1 is to remove barriers to educational equity in our systems and our structures and our policies. And so that group has started to really dig into the details about that, which you'll hear more about this evening. Goal 2 is to increase participation and voice in the community, again, to build those strong school and family partnerships. And goal 3 is to build staff capacity around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to support our ability to support all students in the district. So at this time, I'd like to ask Tiana, Miss Neslin, and Miss Rishardi up to the table to talk about Goal 1. You can sit.
Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having us. So for Goal 1, our main focus is to remove barriers to educational equity. So beginning last year, we started building a lot of our groundwork by doing a lot of research on what other schools were doing. We were looking more towards what their disciplinary actions were like, their practices, what we could draw from them, and what we hope to implement in our school in the future.
So this year, we looked at the extended detention program at the high school. It's a 2.5-hour detention that you could be assigned to up to twice a week. And we wanted to see if we could use that platform as a time to kind of pilot different ways of doing that, rather than just having kids be assigned to a detention hall where they sit in silence for 2.5 hours. Potentially they can do academic stuff. They could go work with a teacher. But other than that, that was the extent of it. Just sit in silence and take your punishment. And we thought, well, if we wanted to try to do more restorative types of things in the school district, how could we maybe pilot some things there? So we started having this process where kids would spend up to an hour of that time talking through things. We've done some small group conversations, we do private conversations, and if there's a private conversation, there's like a series of 6 questions that the kids process through with an adult in the room, and the adult takes notes and just listens, and then the students have a chance to kind of like look at that and say, is this true? And they think about, well, how were they feeling at the time when whatever they did got them in trouble, and what were they thinking at the time, and how did that action impact other people, and including themselves and others, and from there it's a springboard to potentially, when they come into a situation like what got them there in the first place, they could maybe make some better choices to avoid doing the thing that got them into detention in the first place. Also, through the group conversations that we've had with the students during this time, students actually brought up something that they thought like wasn't equitable, and we thought, well, is there a way we can like change this? So in addition to extended detention, students are also assigned potentially a UAR, an unauthorized absence recovery, and this is part of the attendance policy to encourage kids to come to school on time and to not have too many absences. And if a student has more than a certain number of unexcused absences or too many tardies, they get assigned the UAR, which traditionally kind of served like the extended detention. It was in the same room, they were encouraged to go work with teachers and do academic makeup work, but it was again that punishment feeling of sitting in silence, not being able to talk. Like if there was 2 kids in the room that had the same class, they couldn't work on makeup work together because they had to be in silence because they were in this detention. And so the students were like, well, should we be punished because we have barriers to getting to school on time? Not everyone just like sleeps in. Some kids have real challenges to getting to school on time or coming to school. And we started thinking, wow, these kids are totally right. Maybe we can reshuffle our resources to make it so these 2 bodies next year are in separate places with separate expectations and separate kinds of ways to get this done, where the students can still make up their time so they don't lose credit in their classes for attendance, but not be feeling like they're being punished for something that may be something that's difficult for them to get to school on time.
Another way we got input from the students is through the criminal justice course. The teacher was very receptive, if you will, of allowing the students in that class, and one of those students actually participates on Goal 1 with us, but to allow the students to make suggested revisions to the code of conduct. So we've been doing a lot of work with the code of conduct and the handbook this year. So I think you're gonna close us out with that last bullet, right?
Yeah, so now we're working on the discipline philosophy. So like I said before, we're doing a lot of research to see what other schools are doing and what we hope to achieve in the future. And from that, we're hoping our future discipline philosophy will reflect the growing diversity we see in Attleboro now, and we want it to be more inclusive of the whole student body and the community as a whole. So we're hoping to implement this in the future, run it by you guys, and make sure it's A-okay.
Any questions or comments on goal 1, Mr. Quinn?
This is awesome. I'm curious if there's any data collection in terms of how this is working, and if you could just speak to what you're thinking about how you might capture or continue to tell that story of the impact that these changes are making on students.
We don't, in terms of the detention piece, we don't have a lot of hard data yet, and there are still kids, who they come and they process and then they cut a class again. It happens,
Sure.
and but we have a lot of like positive anecdotal evidence from kids that they feel like their voices they matter, that we care about them, that they're not just shoved in the corner and like take your punishment. And so the conversations that we have with kids are actually really quite powerful. And like often when you say, well, who is it impacted? Well, me, I'm here. And then you probe them a little bit, and then they get to like see how potentially if they were disruptive in class or something, how that might impact the teacher. And I think what it does is it builds empathy from the kids towards the teachers. And for at least for me and Ms. Rosa, who are the primary teachers who are working in this program, like you also develop more. And so ideally down the road, people in like teachers in their classes would be processing with kids on this for other types of matters. And then the empathy building there is really powerful. But at the end of this year, we will have some data, like hard data, not actually,
Yeah, it's so new that I was more curious about if there's like a process in place. I think twofold, like this could be a proof of concept that other districts could take a look at and see, and other districts could benefit from. But also, and I think you touched upon this too, but this type of change can also potentially shift the student's perspective and relationship with the school, which I think is critical, not just this barrier piece, which is significant, but also just their general feeling of being welcomed in school, that school is a place for them that they can identify with. And I just think it's a fantastic goal, and I'm curious about the endeavor, but I'm also really hopeful too. So
some weird little tidbit that we learned that we never thought is that when we talk to the students, we find out that a surprising number of the kids who are in extended detention, whether it's for attendance issues or for behavioral issues, when we go around the room, oftentimes half or more of the kids didn't live their whole lives in Attleboro. And so we were like, whoa, well, maybe if kids feel disconnected, then they're ending up here, right? And they're more disconnected, and then ultimately they're not getting the best education they have, they're not achieving. And we think if we can build kind of more of that empathy and that connection, then maybe they won't be doing the things that end up in that space.
it really gets to the root of the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's disconnect.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
How many kids are just like, oh yeah, no, I lived in New Hampshire till 2 years ago, or I moved here from here, or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So for goal 2, I have Miss Robin McDonald and Miss Rebecca Halsey.
Good evening,
Good
everybody.
evening.
So, goal 2 is all about increasing the participation and voice of the community with the schools, and really the schools with the community. And we've spent a bit of time assessing what the current opportunities are. How are the schools currently involved in the community, and how is the community involved in the school? And when we talk about community, we talk about family members and families of students who are in school, but also businesses and nonprofit organizations and other folks that might be able to be more involved in the schools and ultimately the education of the kids of Attleboro. One of the big things we've been working on is surveying the stakeholders at a number of different venues over the last year. to ascertain what their thoughts are. How do they perceive the schools currently? How do they perceive their ability to be involved in the schools? And currently, we're looking at what these inputs are providing from a standpoint of common threads. What are some of the things that we're learning as a result of the survey? We'll take a look at the data, and then would anticipate in the next year we'll spend time taking the data and generating some action steps that will create a higher and deeper level of engagement in both directions, school and community and school.
Questions or comments? Any anything this early in the stage that you've noticed as far as common feedback from community partners?
I would say the common theme has been schools are great. We keep hearing kind of generic answers. One of the things we've talked about is really in the next wave of surveying, having some specificity to the questions that are really follow-ups. Well, how are the schools are great? You have to keep drilling down to really learn both perception and then reality. Because when you're surveying people, even face-to-face, frankly, the tendency is, how quick can I respond to your questions and then move along? So I think the questions will become more specific in the second wave so that we can drill down on what do people really think their involvement opportunity is to increase the experience that kids are having and that the community is having with the schools. So,
and I
more to come.
can add to that a little bit. We just recently did a community conversation on last Wednesday. And so for like the different types, as Robin was talking about, the like surveying is that quick, they're like 2-question survey or a 10-question survey that we did both online and in person. But for our community conversations, it's an hour and a half. And so we establish some rapport with our community members, and then we have an hour-long conversation regarding our focus on how do you connect with the school? Like, how do they communicate with you? Do you feel welcome in the school? And so from that, like, there's been some common themes that they enjoy, or they are thankful for all the ways that we communicate with parents. They've mentioned using Remind and email and the website being updated, and so they're appreciative of those efforts. There are also, we hear a lot of great feedback on some of the arts programs for our elementary school students, but then also on the side note of the middle school parents, seeing not a disconnect, but like would like to see increased art and music in middle schools, and then also just from the high school level, feeling supported from the middle school level, but like looking for more support at the high school level. And that's just from over the course of a few conversations.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
And the next goal, I'd like to ask Reverend Harris and Jack O'Donnell and Miss Jen Thibodeau up.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
All right. So goal 3 is about building the staff capacity basically to be more equitable and inclusive in the schools. Something I want to make clear right off the bat. In no way are we saying, teachers are doing something wrong, or as an extension of that students are doing something wrong. It's just like, as we're going through this work, we realize a lot of these things are uncomfortable. When we talk about race, it can be really challenging, and our main purpose is that we're just providing everyone what they need to be successful. So when we started out, we did a student survey last year. We collected data, looked at what the students were thinking, and it was at the high school. We found out some kind of shocking things and maybe some not so shocking things. There was a lot of talk about, and this goes back to goal 1 as far as like discipline, where some students who are in a certain group are judged for doing a bad behavior, and then another person in another group does the same behavior, but they don't get punished the same. So we see a lot of that. We see a lot of things about racial divides where certain students see that black students may hang out with black students and not have relationships with white students or Hispanic students. But then at the same time, others don't see that. So there's these disparities that we see, and we're trying to figure out why that is. And then after, in non-regards to race, but we also see some issues regarding student-teacher relationships. So just the fact that we want teachers to have these good relationships with their students, where students feel comfortable being with their teachers, as an extension to be someone who can support them and give them what they need. So basically, after we did those surveys, and that was online, we wanted to get more qualitative kind of info about what exactly the data meant. So then we did student focus groups. So we did separate the focus groups by age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and we had these questions that we created within the Be Heard group to kind of gauge where, if the information we collected from the surveys were correct. And what we found is that a lot of it was correct. So, you know, students are seeing these divides. They are seeing disconnects between teachers and students. And for the future, you know, as we move forward, and Ms. Thibodeau and Reverend Harris will speak to this, you know, we're trying to build the community and school to be able to give those supports and give everything that a student may need, and everything that a teacher may need too, because just as much as a student needs something, you know, it's all about, you know, we're trying to give everybody what they need to be successful, and we're trying to create that transparency between students, teachers, administration, and school committee, and all that. So, yes, that's my point.
Thank you, Jack. So now that we know what the students feel, we've decided that we need to hear from the teachers and the staff. And so our next step is to have staff focus groups, which will actually take place this Friday. And we're using the same set of questions that we used for the students, just slightly retooled to look at things from a little bit of a different perspective. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to gauge the culture of the school and the climate of the school. To reiterate what Jack was saying, we want to provide staff with the tools. As you can see, our goal is to build staff capacity. And what that means is providing the staff with the tools that they need to ultimately build the successful relationships that will allow them to give students a chance to succeed. We're looking to do this through professional development, which is currently being planned for all members of the APS community. And it's being planned, by various stakeholders, not just a group of teachers. It's being planned by different people. And in fact, Reverend Harris has already started some of this work in planning it and doing this professional development with administrators and higher level personnel.
So building on what Jack was talking about with the student survey, what we've learned is that the students want more of those conversations, that they really welcome that opportunity. And we're hoping that we'll see the same from the teachers as well, that they'll have the conversations and want more of it. From a community perspective, I view the community work of Be Heard through the lens of a growth mindset, if you will, that we can all get better at this, all get better at developing relationships across race and understanding and being empathetic. So to that end, the community coalition work that's been done brings in representatives from, in terms of residents, as well as community leaders or public officials like Rob and myself and others, all at the same tables, sitting there equally, brainstorming, working together, thinking together, and developing things like that survey, which was granularly challenging. What question, what words do we use? And so that kind of work helps to build relationship in a powerful way. And so we're seeing that And there's still more work to be done there. We don't have a full representation of all the community in the way that we want to, and that needs to continue to grow. There aren't as many people of color in the room as we would like to see, so we're still working on that. But those who are there are coming regular. They show up at the meetings, not just because of the great food that's provided by the wonderful culinary arts in this high school. So people are coming. As it relates to the district professional development work that I've done, which is contingent to Be Heard, but not part of, it's separate from. The approach there is always head, heart, and hands. So what's the theory? What are the models that we can bring to help people understand this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then building on that head component or the hearts, how do I feel about this? How can I tap into my feelings? And then what do I do about it? So we've been doing that work with the district PD. I've led, I think, 3 or 4 at this point, professional development sessions. And I'm so delighted. We just completed one a couple of weeks ago, and there's just exponential growth among the district leaders, which is so remarkable and wonderful. And when I say growth, what I'm talking about is they are thinking differently. They're asking questions about, well, how might this be different, or what's another approach I could use? I've even begun, and I welcome this, getting phone calls from professionals within the school system saying, I had this experience. Can you help me walk through and help me understand how else I might approach this? We had one situation where a student objected to not being selected for something. She wrote a letter. The professional and I sat down and we talked through that letter in terms of how could she respond. The initial reaction was, well, we should talk about the grammar in the letter. But then we got to, well, why might the student feel rejected and what could we do? And so they had this wonderful conversation that was growth for the student and for the administrator. So those are the kinds of things we're seeing as an example. There are many others, but just to give you a sense of what kind of movement we're seeing in a short time among the districts.
Any questions or comments on goal 3, Mr. Larson?
Well, it kind of ties all of them together. I mean, I think some of the stories are fantastic, and I think, some of the one-on-one interaction between the adults and the students, I think, quite honestly, maybe some of the first time they've had some of those conversations, some people actually ask them those questions, which I think is fantastic. Because just kind of getting through that initially
So true.
could really make a change in a lot of people's lives. I'm not concerned, but anytime we have like these presentations, I always try in my mind to think, what does success look like?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I think in this situation, success is going to be, one person at a time. But for the whole Be Heard movement, what does success look like? Because I think it's going to be a lot of individual stories. But then how do we convince the community that, I want to, I'm not expressing myself right, but.
No, you're expressing yourself beautifully. It's a both and. It's both and. So there is this individual one-on-one developed relationship with people, and then there's the systemic component, which we're starting to talk about. What is the process for discipline? Are we only handling discipline from a punishment perspective, or is there a restorative justice perspective? That's a systemic approach. It could be also systemic in terms of how much are we inviting the student voice into the process? That's systemic, not individual. So I think it absolutely is both and some of the skepticism that you're representing or presenting to us today is definitely in the population. We're not there yet where everyone.
No, it's not a skepticism. It's a concern. I think what's happening is fantastic. I guess I'm concerned about being able to have it continue.
Yeah. So that's why the system.
So I guess
And
I'm looking forward to the next phase of.
To address that, this is actually something that we've discussed before, that this is not a, yes, the grant is 3 years, but this won't end in 3 years. It can't, right? Because the population is always changing, the concerns are always changing. There's all sorts of variables that constantly need to be addressed, and so.
Well, every year we're gonna have people that need to have these little one-on-one conversations.
Exactly. And so we're looking at this as something that is sustainable over time. We were just talking about how when our seniors leave, what are we going to do? And so I appreciate what you're saying, that yes, like this is not something that has a discrete ending, that it's something that needs to continue.
And I just wanted to add, for many people, it's the first time they're talking about race and difference, and some people are really uncomfortable, as it would be expected, and so this is not something that's going to happen overnight. That's why the growth mindset is the way to think about this, that we're all works in progress, and figuring this out.
Mr. Quinn?
And I think one of the big differences this time around is that the people involved are community members. It's not some outside person who doesn't live here. They do great work, they collect their check, and then they go on to the next one. This is all, I'm so impressed by the collective external leadership we've been able to bring to the table. Reverend Harris, having been to your seminar, you just run them beautifully and they're thought-provoking. And the fact that we've been able to tap into people who live here and who can continue that conversation, that sustainability piece that you spoke about, is critical, and that's one of the many reasons why I have hope about this, that it's a sustained process, because the people have skin in the game that are part of this conversation. So.
Can I add something
Yes.
to the conversation? So in our work and the connections that we're making, whether it's at a conference or with each other, is that we have a ton of people and a ton of communities that we can aspire to and get inspiration from. And so it won't happen overnight, but like 10 years from now, when you walk into Attleboro High School, the culture will be different. And so the process is starting now, but like it will happen, we'll create a way that kids are comfortable bringing up stuff, and then more stuff will come up, and so you'll see it, but it will be gradual as we go, and we'll have, long after the grant is gone, the inspiration that has come from the work that we've been doing will continue to live on.
I'll also say too that just for the particular goal that we have of building staff capacity, besides Be Heard as a collective group, there is already a lot of buy-in from the staff itself, teachers who are already willing to do a lot of this work, because we're starting at the schools before we reach out to the community, and I just want to say that there's a lot of positive takes with that. So it's just about getting that community piece together with those other pieces, but I think there is a lot of positive steps that we're already taking and a lot of buy-in, so I think that's a good outlook for now.
Oh, Ms. Domenici?
Oh, yeah, I just, again, I'm looking forward to being, taking a more active role in the Be Heard Collaborative. And so I'm really excited as to where things are. And I find it interesting because goal one, there's a targeted group of folks who, what you've gleaned from them is that there's disconnect. There's levels of disconnect. But yet in goal two, you're reaching out to a different group of people from, maybe the parental side, and they're like, oh, we think there's great connection. And then now it's, well, let's layer them so that there's perspective on both sides. And then I guess the constant through this, although, all three variables will change, is that the teachers are somewhat of a constant. I mean, we have teachers that have been here for a while, and, so there's, they'll see those different patterns. So there is the opportunity, even though it's a 3-year grant, similar to how we build out our strategic plans. Like there's groundwork being laid here, and I'm comfortable and confident that it'll continue. But I just listening tonight, it starts out that way. You have to start delving into sections before you can kind of divide them through and find those deltas that, where you can really group people together. But I found that fascinating, that from a different perspective of the world. I mean, I'm a parent of 3, so we're constantly trying to, ask my kids, what where they're, how they're feeling, what is their connections, and trying to do, the right things and be inclusive. But it's, having a collaborative like this is, impressive. I don't know of another, school department in the area that does anything like this. So once again, it's good to be a part of something that's, kind of trend setting. So thank you all.
So, Jack, you're to remain. Speaking of some of our future student leaders, Jack O'Donnell, Henry Boateng, and Lauren Brown just attended the New England Secondary School Conference, which is a group that is coordinated by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. And so these students actually just went to the conference as student leaders, and they're here to just share a few points that they got from the conference itself.
All right. Yeah. So if you guys remember from last year, Miss Halsey had an impromptu coming over to the school committee to ask for money so I could stay at a hotel last year at the conference, which, once again, thanks. It really impacted me a lot, and I was happy enough to and glad enough to be invited back again. So I'm going to speak to some of the sessions. I went to a bunch of sessions about different things. A lot of the stuff overlaps with Be Heard, so I kind of just took some things for Be Heard and for some things that I'm doing in school. A lot of stuff about inequities, but I'm going to talk about community engagement specifically. So this one session I went to, well, I'll start like this actually. Community engagement is really hard. It's really hard. And it's at times it's overbearing for people who have different roles in the schools, in the community, to be trying to do all their work on top of this community work. So I went to this session called Manchester Proud. So in Manchester, New Hampshire, we had this presentation from this lady who is an actual community engagement position. So in my mind, I'm like, wow, this is great, because Be Heard's going through that. We even have a community engagement group. I know that people have been dropping out of leadership positions within the group because it's so much work to do and they have to do other things, and it's like it's all making sense now. So basically the way it works in Manchester is that this position involves the one community engagement position doing that work. So this lady, she was going out into the community. She was the one finding all the info, taking surveys, collecting info from the community, the schools. She would meet with all the principals of each school. The way she talked about it is that you shouldn't look about changing the whole school district, but each individual school. So she looked at it as, I'm going to go to the elementary schools and see what their issues are, try to fix those, go to the middle schools, see what their issues are, go to the high schools. And it was really effective. The way she was able to alleviate some of the stress that this work causes others to go through was really powerful, and it allowed for more work to be done. For Manchester too, they had kind of their own separate little committees within the community, similar to Be Heard, sort of like these little mini Be Heard groups that the community engagement position would work with. So kind of my almost proposition in a way is that I think in the future, just with how Be Heard's going and stuff, and this was just an idea that I had. I was not paid to say this. I think in the future it would be really interesting to look into a similar community engagement position, and secondly, to start thinking about a community engagement policy, because we don't really have it necessarily written out how we're supposed to engage in community engagement, because a lot of the times, especially if you're talking about hiring a community engagement person, you need protocols that they can go through to be able to do the work. So I've had resources that I've shared with Miss Regan, Miss Halsey, about our pre-made kind of policies and ideas of just like how that may look. So yeah, that was kind of my takeaway. I think we should really look into and emphasizing community engagement and maybe looking into someone that could help out alleviating that stress from a lot of people. So that was my big takeaway.
Hi everyone, I'm Henry, and I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very grateful. So like actually, the section I went to was Black Lives Matter. It involves this small high school in Maine where they raise a Black Lives Matter flag, and it receives critics from all over the country, and so like even though they receive critics, like the critics was both negative and positive, but like mostly negative, saying insulting the school, insulting the principal because the principal was involved, but like still the principal got involved, with the movement, and I think we should really also allow that and also like accept that sorry. I think we should also allow such stuff because like if we allow it, I think there's gonna be a connection between teachers and students since the principal who is like of a high official allowing students to do such stuff, so it means like they're gonna connect more, so and here as due to the Black Matter flag raising of the Black Matter flag, there was flexible clubs such as the principal advisory team where the principal meets with some students and they discuss like what to do about the school, to improve the school, the facilities and all that, and also since then because of the Black Lives Matter flag, there've been empathy, because like Maine has a low population of black people. So since then there've been an empathy between black people and white people since they can both connect more. And also due to this movement, there are more white people coming to join the movement too. So as the saying goes, every big thing start with small beginnings. So I think if we all come together and join in the movement, then definitely we're gonna create the awareness about like Black Lives Matter, and it's gonna avoid a little bit, too much racism in this country. So thank you.
Thank you.
Something that I took away from the conference in several sessions that I went to from different schools presenting was an incorporation of social and emotional learning, where they kind of built relationships with between like peers, students and their teachers and administrators, and creating an environment where students feel comfortable sharing areas they need improvement on. And I know this kind of seems like individual conversations that need to be had, but I believe at our school way we could incorporate this would be through advisory, and it's kind of an easy way. So the one particular school, when the students received their report cards, they kind of met in small groups and said, well, what classes didn't you do so well in? And just making an environment where students would feel comfortable sharing that information. And then they would say, all right, well, do any other students in the group, do you do well in this class, and what makes you do well? Do you do a study group after school? Do you meet with this teacher? What are your study methods? And just having that open communication, I think, would be really critical in our school, because I know not everyone learns the same way, and not everyone's always comfortable asking questions and self-advocating. And then another session that I thought was important was the engagement in science and math classes. And it was about different stations and menus where students can show their competencies, because, again, not everyone learns the same way. And the competency-based learning, I thought was really, impactful, because it kind of, another one was, about grading what students learn, not earn. So just showing, progression and effort, and being graded based off of that versus, everyone doing the same thing every day. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Last one, I'd like to invite Kanta up to the table.
Hi everyone, I'm
Hello.
Hamza. Thank you guys for giving me your time to discuss the impact of Be Heard. So you guys are probably wondering, as we're telling you guys all of this stuff, what's the impact? What's the benefit? I'd say two major benefits is students and community have like a voice, and that's really important as a goal for Be Heard, and awareness of biases. So I personally think that's a big impact for me because I feel like Be Heard has given me a voice to like talk about my issues within the community and within the school, and that's like I said, it's a really important issue. And then the next steps we could talk about is recruitment. So most of our students are seniors in the Be Heard organization. So we want to recruit more people within the school, and basically have more people like community members around, not just Attleboro, but like not just like Attleboro Public Schools, but just around the community. Because we don't want there's like a connotation where like Be Heard is from Attleboro Public Schools, but we want to make it into like a community coalition, which is an important thing because we don't want to just make it from Attleboro. We want to make it like a whole entire Attleboro community type of thing, which is important for Be Heard to progress. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so again, we want to thank you. I know that this was a lot of information all at one time, but we've been working for almost 2 years now on creating our plan and starting to implement. And as you can see, we have quite a few students involved as well as community members, and we hope to continue to grow and become a stronger coalition that's a true Attleboro community coalition. So,
Mr. Quinn?
One question I have, and this is more for the future, is it's dovetailed nicely because today is the budget discussion. And while we have a grant for another year or two, do we get a
1 year?
1 year. What would it take budgetarily for this to be sustainable district and on its own? And I think that's something that I think we should be aware of. And how do we support that so we can make a decision? Because I think the work's having an impact. And how do we make sure, to Mr. Larson's point, that not only what does success look like, but what resources are needed to sustain current growth and continue to maintain that growth mindset.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone as well who came and presented.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, next up is our Student Advisory Council around Attleboro update, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Larson for that.
Alright. So springtime is testing time at the elementary schools. They have MCAS for the 3rd and 4th graders. It's English from April 8th through the 11th. And then also on April 11th, Bullitt will have a PTO meeting. And then at the middle school level, they also are having their English MCAS from April 8th to the 9th. And then Brennan will have a color run on April 11th. And I've been to one, it's really fun. And then at the high school, we have both on April 10th, the parent conferences, which parents can sign up for to meet with their student teachers. And then also a highly selective college panel. BU will be there, BC will be there, Harvard will be there, and they just answer a bunch of questions about applying to college and what they're kind of looking for on different applications and things like that. For community engagement, very important, school vacation is April 15th through the 19th, so we have that's next week, next Monday through Friday. And then just this past week, the Student Council at Attleboro High School ran a blood drive, and we collected, between all the students and staff that donated, 23 units of blood. And there was actually a representative that came from the Red Cross, and they were just so grateful to us for doing this drive. because they just really rely on them for any sort of emergency situation that a patient needs blood for. So there will be another one in the future if anyone ever wants to donate their own. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Larson. Next, we have our business agenda, and start with the report of the superintendent. Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few brief updates before we get into two presentations this evening. The first is I updated the committee on Friday. We were very excited last week to learn that we had been awarded from the state the Improving Student Access to Behavioral and Mental Health Services grant. That's going to bring $110,000 into the district to help us to provide services directly to students during the school day with our partner in this grant, Fuller Hospital. So this is very exciting, and we're very happy to have this opportunity for our students. We're also happy to announce that through our work with Project Here in the Attorney General's office, we're going to be getting a grant that will allow us to bring training for programming from Sandy Hook Promise, which is, again, another way that we're going to try to meet the needs of kids and to identify social emotional learning issues in real time, to not let them turn into the kinds of problems that can really present an issue for community. So we're excited by that, and I should also mention that City Councilor Diane Holmes was instrumental in helping us to get that, and so we appreciate her support in those efforts. You should also know that the search for a new principal for Thatcher Elementary School is well underway. Ms. Regan is chairing the screening committee, which is being conducted at Thatcher with a representative group of stakeholders at the school. Their process is already underway, and I believe they'll be interviewing when we get back from vacation. Their task is to screen the applicants and figure out which of them are worthy of being finalists, and then they will send their list of finalists to me, and I will interview that pool and make a selection from there. So we're on a fast track and hope to have that wrapped up in short order. And then finally, just a project update. One on Thursday evening at 6:30 in the Bray Auditorium. We'll be having an abutters meeting about the project, so it's a chance to learn for people who are affected approximately by the work. We'll let them know what's going on, but certainly a place where people can learn more about the project as a whole. And I would also let you know that the fencing will be going up over April break, so this project is going to get very real very quickly, and we're excited about seeing the evidence of that in the near term. It's going to be 3 years of headaches, to be quite honest, as we have to accommodate all this work, but it's the kind of headache you're happy to have. So that's it for my short updates. At this time, I'd like to ask to join me, have Ms. DeSimone join our Data and Accountability Coordinator to talk about our annual report. The mouse.
Is touch screen? Here, let's do this. We got the power.
Yeah, it looks like you're having your. Yeah, there you go.
Well, good evening, everybody.
Welcome.
Hello.
Nice to be here. And I'd just like to say my heart feels happy after hearing that the Be Heard. That's really nice, beautiful work going on in the district. So tonight I'm here to talk about the annual report. So the official good evening, school committee members, Superintendent Sawyer and Assistant Superintendent Regan. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the 2017-2018 annual report. First on the agenda is a big thank you to the 3 years of headache that are coming, right? In April 2018, the citizens of Attleboro said yes to a new AHS. We look forward to state-of-the-art learning opportunities. The new state-of-the-art school will be the center of a community united around education, where all stakeholders value and participate in our collective success. They'll have a Blue Pride Mall, which will feature student services and products for sale, and will be a welcoming city venue for various community events. And September 2022, here we come. Looking forward to it. So students in Attleboro Public Schools come from a wide variety of backgrounds and have many skills that enrich their educational endeavors. Much like these colored pencils here, each student is unique, and when all the proverbial colored pencils are used together, beautiful artwork is created. This creativity comes shining through in academic tasks that require critical thinking, problem solving, and teamwork. Students analyze academic problems and use strong communication skills, much like we heard tonight, to help pinpoint the cause of the situation and persevere through problem resolution. As far as community outreach, in addition to be heard, Goal 3 in the strategic plan calls for greater community and external engagement. During the 17-18 school year, students and staff did just that. Whether they were showing art at the Attleboro Museum, or performing music at the Attleboro Library, or sparking conversation following the documentary screenagers, or raising $27,000 for Special Olympics, their impact was undeniably positive. As far as community partnerships, 2 key partnerships included the Choose H2O project and the Attleboro Be Heard Coalition. The water stations were installed at Brennan and Wamsutta. Coelho's is being installed soon. Quick fact about the new water filling stations is a 22-ounce bottle can be filled in 10 seconds, which is pretty impressive. And at Wamsutta alone, the units saved 15,000. They were refilled over 15,000 times, which precluded a correlating number of water bottles not going into landfills. So from an environmental standpoint, that's a really positive one. And the Be Heard from the Nellie Mae Foundation involved active listening and resulting action. Were the main activators for change in the Attleboro Be Heard Coalition. As far as the strategic plan and the programs that it entails, the Massachusetts Tiered System of Support grant-funded team training for UDL, inclusive practices, and PBIS throughout the district. Inclusive practices refers to the instructional and behavioral strategies that improve academic and social emotional outcomes for all students, with and without disabilities in general education settings. Evidence-based frameworks that support those inclusive practices. 2 of them here are Universal Design for Learning, also known as UDL, to improve and optimize teaching. UDL is based on scientific insights on how people learn. The guidelines can be applied to reduce barriers and maximize learning opportunities for every learner. PBIS is the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. It's a proactive approach to establishing behavioral supports and the social culture needed for all students in a school to achieve social, emotional, and academic success. Moving on to Full Steam Ahead. The first annual Blue Steam Ahead night was a wonderful confluence of science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Youngsters and their parents enjoyed a night out with engaging and hands-on activities. And as well as the Blue Steam Ahead, the district hosted several other events, including the SMARTS learning opportunities during school vacations and after school, also Studley's Full Day of Science, the Camp Invention, and the AHS Robotics Club were all intriguing activities that captured and maintained students' attention. As far as English language arts, the fun academic activities began before the school year even started with a program called Libraries Rock. This high energy and high interest event kicked off a very successful year in English language arts. The sister read to the Attleboro Big Read was The Bridge to Terabithia. Middle schoolers throughout the district had a plethora of engaging activities with this material. There were also 3 author visits throughout the district, and those author visits focused on the nonfiction writing process, sketching historical figures, and sharing inspiration as a novelist. And the class of 2018, they were a class of movers and shakers for sure. 99% of the class had plans after graduation. And 90 post-secondary institutions were lucky to get these young, ambitious students. And this class received over $16 million in renewable merit scholarships, which is quite impressive. So a hearty thank you to the guidance department and all the other teachers and staff that helped support these young people who were the impetus behind their successes. Getting into the different school levels now is at the high school. On the note of merit, AHS earned some impressive honors for the 5th year in a row. The Washington Post included AHS on their list of most challenging schools, and the U.S. News and World Report included AHS on their best high schools in Massachusetts list. The high caliber teaching practices will certainly continue to evolve and flourish over time. And the ACA, which is our second high school here in Attleboro, they're breaking ground by piloting MyCap. So MyCap is My Career and Academic Plan, and that personalizes each student's educational path to maximize their individual strengths. The ACA and Studley third graders had a program together called the Science Buddies Program, which was really mutually beneficial for everyone involved. And at our 3 middle schools, Brennan, they are a very proud Do the Right Thing school. Their Best Buddies program helps encourage student empathy and to build long-lasting dynamic relationships. At Coelho, the staff are active learners in the Inclusive Practices Academy, and students are certainly benefiting from authentic performance assessments. At Wamsutta, they had numerous academic achievements. Of note, there were 5 Curiosity Challenge winners, and their Math Counts team advanced from the regional to the state competition, which was pretty neat. Moving to our elementary schools, we need to yet again recognize Hyman Fine for their continued and teaching and learning successes. Only 52 schools across the Commonwealth were earned the Schools of Recognition status. They got that for high student growth. So way to go, Hyman Fine Hawks. Hill Roberts teachers are actively learning strategies at the Inclusive Practices Academy and on in-house learning walks. Studley last year converted their library into a makerspace and continues to be an amazing place to learn and grow academically. At Thatcher in the Early Learning Center, they're reaping positive gains from their students via in-school and home-based PBIS initiatives. And lastly, at Willett, healthy eating is a lot easier thanks to their garden, which provides fresh organic crops to their cafeteria and by donating vegetables to local food pantries. So Blue Pride future is looking bright for sure. Booker T. Washington once said, "Nothing ever comes to one that is worth having except as a result of hard work." Attleboro students certainly know the value of hard work, and their futures are bright indeed.
Any questions or
Questions?
comments?
Just a thank you. That was a great presentation,
Thank you,
highlighting.
Mrs.
I know
Gales.
there's just so many other things that you could have highlighted, and because the list goes on, and the report was fantastic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
You too.
Thank you. All right.
Hello, Mr. Furtado.
Evening. All right, so this evening we're here to present the FY20 budget. This is just another step in a long process, but an important one, as this is the first time that we are publicly discussing the contents of this presentation. We're going to set some goals for ourselves. We're going to look at the state budget proposals. We're going to talk about what FY20 looks like for us. We're going to review what our priorities are, and then we'll try to wrap this all up in a cohesive conclusion. So, what are our goals? We want to make sure you understand the various mass funding proposals that the state is considering. We want you to understand the context of the FY20 budget and some of the key figures that inform our discussion about it. And we want to make sure that you understand how we are meeting our educational priorities through this process. Just a reminder, we are really, at this point, halfway through our budget development, which is, sort of the last quarter of the entire process. This is a year-long endeavor, and as we enter into this final stage, it's just important to remember how much went into informing the information that is contained within. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Furtado, who will explain to us the different funding proposals being considered by the state.
Or try to. So, we, at this point of the year, we are usually in receipt of, or very close to in receipt of, the House budget proposal. That is not the case this year. That hasn't been, there's been very little discussion about when that's coming out or when that should be expected to be seen. So I want to caution the committee that the legislature seems to be in a very deep process, more so than usual. And in addition to that, there are multiple funding proposals causing a little more uncertainty going forward. In December, the state had to kind of figure out how they were going to base their budget data, the cherry sheet and Chapter 70 funding. And Governor Baker proposed his budget using a series of assumptions for the state budget going forward. So his budget is actually one of the funding proposals for schools. He altered the Chapter 70 formula, specifically in special education and in ELL funding. And basically what he did is he took the Funding Commission's recommendations, cut it into 7 equal pieces, and proposed piece number 1 for FY20. There's some frustration with that on the part of the folks who are looking for reform in school funding, in the sense that it's 7 years long, and that's too long for many people. But it did result in some additional funding for Attleboro. So there are some competing proposals in the legislature. a Senate proposal that's called Promise that mirrors Governor Baker's proposal, but shortens the timeline and fulfills all of the commission's recommendation. There are folks who are pretty upset with that because a lot of the money is going to go to the Boston Public Schools, and they're kind of losing sight of the fact that the rest of us would also benefit with the alterations to how special education funding is done, how ELL funding is done, and how employee benefit funding is done. So a third proposal is the Tucker proposal, which is in the House, which took pieces of the Commission's proposal and then put some limits on other parts of it, such as ELL funding. But to offset those limits, it promised to carry out whatever it's going to do. A lot of it is undefined in 5 years. So the Tucker proposal addresses the timeline concerns, but doesn't fully flesh out the other components. Governor Baker's proposal addresses the Commission's concerns, but over a 7-year period, and then the Promise also addresses the Commission's concerns, but has insisted that it's going to be less than 7 years. So all of these things are in action, and we've started with Governor Baker's proposal. Sorry. With Governor Baker's proposal and the introduction of our foundation budget, we saw a couple of things. Again, very good news. First of all, some of it's driven by enrollment. Our foundation enrollment was up 44 students. And Chapter 70 funding, the state funding went up 7.2%, or $2.7 million. Great news. Everybody was very excited about that at the time. In addition to that, the city requirement was up 4%, or $1.4 million.
I got you.
So total new funding for Attleboro was just over $4 million. Again, great news. That tied with the $1 million that we receive annually from the meals tax and the new growth funding that we receive would have resulted in a net school spending number of about 78.7 or $8 million. Our level service budget was $78.6 million, so we were kind of excited about where we stood at that point. However, our funding will not be increasing by $4 million, even with the net school spending budgets, as well as the meals tax money and the new growth money. And actually, our initial meeting with the city showed a budget of about $77.9 million, which was about $750,000 less than our level service budget, and this was driven, by the formula allowing for credits being taken for charter school tuitions, services in kind by the city, such as our issuing of payroll checks and insurance management, and school choice costs. So we have about $500,000 in school choice students going to places like Norton. We have over $4 million in charter school tuitions. And then a component of Governor Baker's proposal and part of the charter school, the Commission's report was charter school tuition reimbursements, which he changed back to the way it originally was, which resulted in a significant decline in the reimbursement the city received, again, harming our funding. So go to the next page, you will see in FY18, the credit against net school spending for the city was $381,000, which all that means is The in-kind services, their tuition payments to Foxborough, and their school choice dollars offset by our transportation costs, which is non-net school spending, meant they could take our net school spending number and reduce it by $381,000. In the current year, it was nearly $900,000, and next year will be $1.2 million.
Mr. Tyler, if I could stop you for a second.
Sure.
Mr. Quinn, do you have a question?
Yeah, and maybe it doesn't make much of a difference. I was just talking with our MASC rep, and
Yeah.
one of the things I'm curious about is that it seems like the in-kind services is a large part the charter school tuition, correct?
That whole line, yes.
Yeah. So
it's over 4 million of the 5.6.
So what I'm curious about is that, at least my understanding, it could be mistaken, is that the charter school tuition is, in part, should be deducted from Chapter 70 because the state is picking up half, and then the city should be paying the other half. But it looks like, at least from the way the budgeting works, is that the city is taking the full dollar value of the costs. Is that correct or incorrect?
What I know is we have, for FY20, the projected enrollment is 375 students.
Yep.
And again, a tuition of about, I think was $4.5 million.
And so my understanding, and I can go back to my MASC rep, is that right off the top, the state pulls out a chunk of our Chapter 70 funding to send out to those charter schools, and that the actual tuition is a function of whatever our total net school spending is. So it's not just the whatever the foundation budget is. If we spend over, I think we were 4% over last year, that's what they get to.
Right.
I was just kind of curious what that might look like if the money was pulled half out of Chapter 70, and then the credits would then be, I mean, maybe it just comes out to the same in the wash, but I was just curious because my understanding, again, this may be incorrect, is that half of that charter tuition should be coming out of our Chapter 70, half is a local responsibility. What that does for our total.
And this is a city obligation. So, the kind of point to take from this slide is, two things. One is, for FY20, the actual, check the city will write, if you will, is up by 1.3%. However, there's additional funding needed for the charter school tuitions that aren't reflected in what they give to us. People, I think, often say that charter schools don't impact public schools. They absolutely do. So there are two things going on. You can see the tuition line going up almost $1 million over those 3 years, and you can see the reimbursement line, which actually would help us, go down almost in half over the same period of time. That's where we're getting, chopped, if you will. If you take that 1.2 million and bring it down to us, where it would be in, again, dandy shape again.
I mean, I guess what sticks out to me on the slide is the bottom right, the 1.3% increase in city funding for the schools.
But that's not all of their funding for schools. They're also paying $4.7 million in.
But the Attleboro public schools are getting an additional 1.3% from the city. Last year we got 2.5%, essentially.
Yeah, I also do. I think that's a function of two things. Number one, because the charter reimbursement offset.
Correct.
Number two, the in-kind services would suggest to me, at least, if there's not a spike in choice enrollment, there's a spike in charter school enrollment. I think it goes back to what Mr. Geddes has been working on in terms of getting those students back. Might be our best shot for helping alleviate some of that pressure there.
Yeah. Their enrollment of Foxborough is up about 45 students over these 3 years.
So that's almost $500,000, right?
Just in the increased enrollment.
Yeah.
Right. We haven't been able to confirm it yet, but I also think they had a tuition increase in that time.
My understanding is that the tuition is tied directly to whatever we're spending per pupil. So they would be different based on the different communities, but whatever we spend overnight in school. But that, again, that could be mistaken. It was just based on a conversation I had with MASC.
I just wanted to, again, put on paper, the 77.1 million is our foundation budget on the bottom. The 78.6 is our level services, and the 79.6 is a reflection of funding that we need to support what we know is going to be happening in September in regard to things like enrollment and support for classrooms. And again, that food, meal tax money, and half of the new tax base, those two things are about $2 million. So in either case, with a net school spending number of 77.1, you know, we'd be above certainly a level service budget and close to what we would need to meet our needs for September. You know, I think the superintendent has frequently discussed and talked about structural stability and being able to sustain services and our educational quality in an environment that does not provide a budget to do so.
Mr. Tayo?
Yeah.
This is a reduction in the amount that we're receiving from the city above net school spending, correct? Is that explained as to why the amount they're giving us above net school spending is going down?
In terms of what's happened in the past, the commitment that the city has made is limited to and focused on the $1 million in meals tax and new growth, again, which is about $1 million. I don't recall discussing the specifics about why the other components were not there.
But the other components above net school spending that we've gotten the past few years are not included.
Not included in these.
The other components, meaning part of transportation, there was like 300,000 commitment.
There were some other small pockets of funds, 2 or 3 of them that were about $250 each, that are not part of this. However, they did say that if we were to offset some transportation funding, we could apply that to net school spending, which we are going to do, about $100,000.
To answer your question, Chairman, the city's position is that they do not have the funds they need to balance the city's budget and honor the historic commitment. And so they have chosen to stick with the meal tax $1 million and the $900,000 that this year represents half the levy. And that there were a collection of smaller amounts that were made in one particular year to satisfy a particular situation that they have been carrying forward, because to do so is to then, punish, take it away. And their position is that they just can't afford those commitments, which were never made in the same way that the two that they are honoring were made. So that's, I think, the distinction that they're making.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It's, it's probably best, not for you to respond. It just seems to me like this is a pulling back on commitments that have been made to funding the past few years, which is surprising to me, but. Mr. Storrs?
So if there was no pulling back of what we've received from the city in the last few years, what would be the difference between where we are, what we're looking at right now, the 750, and where we would be?
I think those amounts that were not included would put us right at a level service budget.
So we'd be good.
Slightly over.
So we'd be in a good shape if it wasn't for that.
I don't know if the administration would call level service good shape, but
I mean, we would have less of an issue, I guess. Might
We'd be
a
in
better
better
way.
shape.
Yeah, okay. I'll go with that.
There you go.
I'll accept that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, excuse me. Again, just to kind of summarize and put things in kind of a quantitative perspective, our DESI, that first bar is our DESI Foundation budget of 77.1 million. The second bar is kind of where we landed after last week's discussion with the city at 77.9 million. The third bar is our level service budget at 78.6, which reflects the $750,000 difference. The fourth bar, again, represents what we know we're going to need based on enrollment and other issues in September. And then that last bar is what we call our educational fulfillment budget. And to Mr. Storr's point, is where we would feel we are in a good position at $89.2 million.
So, school committee asked you to present three budgets. Those three right bars are the three budgets.
Yes.
Level service, urgent needs, and the $10 million number. Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Domenici?
Maybe you're gonna go into it. I've looked over the presentation and all, but I guess my question is, what is the next step? Are there follow-up discussions? Do we bring the budget director into a budget subcommittee meeting and try to work the difference that we see here?
Well,
and what is that impact right now?
No, that's a great question. We're on kind of two paths. So we ended our meeting with the city, kind of landing on the $77.9 million number with some reductions on our part in non-personnel lines. And then we also agreed that there remains a gap. So we're at about 78.2 million right now, and so we have a bit of a gap between where we think we can reach to. And as I said at the beginning, we've got a bunch of balls in the air in terms of how funding is going to go. I would be shocked if at the end of the legislative process funding was any less than the Baker budget. It would very likely be more. What that magnitude is, we don't know. So thought it would be prudent to sort of watch the process a little bit and see where that heads before closing that last space.
Right, I mean, that's something I've had in the back of my head, that at a minimum, we're gonna get the governor's proposal, and
Right.
potentially
More.
we're gonna get one of these other ones if the legislature can come to some sort of accord in a timely fashion where it would impact the fiscal year 20 budget. But for me, just as a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Is there a list of, you mentioned there were certain, was it recommendations, or do we have that? Is that?
I haven't distributed that yet, but I
Okay.
can do that.
Okay,
Sure.
I'd be interested in seeing it, so.
So I think at this point, it would be good to mention that the city's direction on this was that, the avoidance of layoffs citywide is the mayor's driving priority. And so they went through our budget and made recommendations about where we could make cuts that would not impact the education that we're offering and would not impact the amount of staff that we have in the district. We have expressed that while any one of those suggestions in and of itself is, reasonable or a plausible maneuver in terms of trying to reduce our budget as part of a citywide effort to reduce everyone's budget, because this is another message that the mayor asked me to share with you, is that, every department is going through this. Every department is being asked to cut, and that from the city's perspective, the schools are a department, and we're just doing our part to cover this deficit. But when you look at the sum totality of it, in this case, over $600,000 in cuts, I made it very clear to the mayor that there's no good reason to believe that everything will break perfectly to allow us to deliver a level educational experience with those funds, right? There's no reason to believe that that's going to be the case. And so I have, grave concerns about how that plays out for us. And the mayor's response to that is that he views the school department as a city department, and just like the other city departments use the city's free cash in a given year to cover the things that emerge that become a problem throughout the year, that would be his approach to resolving the concerns for the school department. And while that still leaves me very concerned about where we sit financially, I do think it's an important change that really deserves consideration, that as a city, for the schools to, for the first time, be considered as another department with access to those funds as a way of resolving our budgetary concerns throughout the year, is a pretty significant change in the way that the city is thinking about the schools. We have, our time, operated under the assumption that basically the schools get what they get, and we're on our own. And we have been delivering on that, and this is the first year that we got, again, we've been warning that we can't keep this going. So it's no surprise that finally this year, a couple things happened that left us in a place where, when we projected forward, we were nervous about where we're going to land. And where we're going to land is still yet to be determined. So we'll see how this all plays out in this last few months. But, when we let the city know that we were finally in this position that anyone could have seen coming, 5 years ago, based on the trajectory we were on, we all remember how that played out. And so I made sure that I had an assurance from the mayor that because we are going through this process at this moment, that he is treating our budget like he's treating the rest of the city's budgets, that he will stand with us and support us through whatever problems are likely to be the case as a result of delivering a budget that is below level services.
Mr. Larson?
So you have an you're hoping to have an assurance?
No, I have an insurance.
You have an insurance, because we had a discussion at the Budget and Finance Subcommittee meeting of one of his recommendations, which about put me on the floor. And I find it an incredibly, I've never thought of funding operations with one-time money as being fiscally responsible before. And
I think they would say that they agree with that.
And that was basically the message that I received, that expenses that we know we are going to incur this year, he removed from our budget with the hope of putting them back with free cash at a future point.
So, one, I think their position is that we should not replace operational costs with one-time infusion of cash. That's not their position, and they have actually, in conversation, said that we should avoid that. The exercise that we experienced was there was a looking at what the district actually is spending in 19, and rather than accepting our estimates, that not because they don't believe them, but just looking at what we actually are spending, rather than upping them where we up them, it was about leaving them at 19 levels. So it's not a reduction down to a level that we know we're going to cost more. It was more of, rather than assume that this is going to cost more, if we're not sure, if we're guessing, let's be more conservative in our guesses, and where there's a problem, we'll handle it. Which I think is a little bit different than intentionally cutting someplace where it's going to cost more than that.
So a couple of issues with this whole thing. You've been doing this a while now, fair to say?
A little bit.
So you're what I think most people call an expert at being able to do exactly what you just said, which is to determine what is and what isn't going to go up. Doesn't mean you're always 100%, but your track record speaks for itself. It's pretty darn good. So for somebody who doesn't do the school budget to make decisions that what you're estimating isn't going to play out that way is a problem for me. You know, I trust what you've done because I've seen over years that what you come up with usually pans out to be correct. So somebody not in the Attleboro Public Schools making a decision about what you've come up with and saying, no, let's not assume that that's what's going to happen, that's a problem to me. I appreciate that we're being given an assurance, but we can't start the school year without having a budget that's going to pay for everything we need for the school year. That's a problem. The fact that non-educational administrators have taken a look at our budget and made recommendations of where we should cut, I have a problem with that as well. That should be coming from you guys, not from anybody outside of this building. That's a problem for me.
Mrs. Scales?
I forgot what I was going to say. So, I'll hold.
So I just to clarify, so there's recommendations from the city, but then have you also done that kind of your own exercise to say, if we have to decide how we think this should go, that this is what we would do, so that or is there just that one like swath on the table right now? Like the city took a shot at it and said, okay. And again, to your point, Mr. Storrs, it's, not being in the day-to-day and just looking at line items, you can say, okay, well, this looks inflated, can we stay here? Is that the only, is there, I guess, are we tasked now as an administration or a budget subcommittee to give it our own shot if, not knowing what's going to potentially come down from the state, and this being what it is?
I'll let Mr. Furtado speak to whether or not, if he had to come up with $600,000, he would do it in a particularly different way. I think the larger issue here is that, the administration is trying to present the committee with the information you need to pass the budget that you see fit, right? We're telling you there's a level service number. We're not changing our level service number, right? It is what it is. I am telling you that the city, who controls how much money we ultimately get, is telling us there isn't enough money to give us a level service number. They're telling us we need to plan for a number less than that. And so, we're here to report that in a very collaborative process, we have worked with them to think about what that would look like and how that would work. That's not our position. That's not what we're advocating for. We gave them a level service number, the same number that we gave you, and it is what it is. And by the way, we're about to get into level service isn't enough. The services might be level, but our issues aren't the same from year to year, right? We have growing concerns. We have growing issues. The idea that 6,000 kids always cost the same amount to educate, really shows that not everybody is fully appreciating that these are human beings, not auto parts. So there are lots of problems here, but the bottom line in this conversation that we're having this evening is that the reality is we've given what our number is. That is, to Mr. Storrs' part, our opinion of what we can do. The city is saying that in this particular fiscal year, they can't do that. Now, whether that's for other people to decide how true that is or what the issues around that are, right? We're saying that we have worked with the city to think through that if that's the number that ends up being the number, that there's a plan to deliver a quality education for our kids in that context. Because ultimately, what we do and have been doing is to continue to deliver for the students of Attleboro, regardless of how it works out for us. Those graphs include all the way up to 89.2. I'm here to tell the city of Attleboro, That's what we need to do the job that we're being asked to do. That's not a wish list. That's not, us all being carried around on litters, right? That's just to meet the needs of the children that we have in front of us every day. And I mean, take care of it in a way that's adequate, that's comparable to what people in other communities are getting, right? That's a very real number. And, as we're about to get into, we need a portion of that for next year if we're going to meet the needs of next year's kids, right? We also know that level services is going to cost us about a number that's, been presented. But we also know that the city is saying that, we should expect less than that. And we have a responsibility to tell you what our plan for dealing with that is. And, we're communicating that, and I want anyone that's listening at home not to panic that, we have a budget problem, because we do have a budget problem. But we're going to continue to work to ensure that we keep the course that we've been on, and to not let any one fiscal year be the end of a pretty good run here.
Yeah, I think this, if I can piggyback on it, because I think it's an important point, which is that the first, we'll have a public hearing, but the next step in the process really is the school committee approving a budget to send to the city. And, we may believe or think that, what we present to the city won't fund, and we'll come back with something smaller. But we need to determine what we think at this time we can reasonably ask for, but also doing our jobs as the school committee members and advocates for the school system. I think the school department has been a very good partner for the last several years in asking for level service or less. And, this presentation is disappointing to me because that is not the message that the school committee had given that we were expecting this year. Not disappointed in you, to be clear, but disappointed in the reality, I guess I would say, because looking at that pie graph, or not pie bar graphs, urgent needs are urgent needs, and we need adequate funding. But anyway, Mrs. Sawyer.
Mark, would you be able to provide us with an exact, where the city exactly wants to make the cuts? Like what their recommendation is? And also, that 600,000, what is a percentage of our budget that represents?
Less than 1%. It's probably 0.8 or something in that neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah, I for one would be curious to see exactly where they want to make cuts.
There is a, somewhat in response to Scott's question, there is a kind of a scale issue, when you're managing, $78 million. Sometimes a number like, again, I've said this in budget meetings all the time, sometimes a number like 600,000 sounds pretty significant, and when it's an eighth, 0.8 of 1% of your budget, you realize how small it is, and it's, part of our discussion last week also had to do with, kind of addressing needs. We, as Superintendent Sawyer just pointed out, a very, very organic, evolving organization that, every week is different. And to be able to deal with that level of movement, because we're dealing with people, you need some ability to address things that pop up. And, so $600,000 is a small portion of our budget, but a vital portion to address our needs as they evolve over the course of the year.
And the bar graph is presented to try to capture that idea, right? It's just a sliver on the total here.
Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the hard thing is we know the higher portion, 90 plus, is fixed cost. We can't control that. It's everything else. And we've been here before. I've lived through this before.
Yep.
Effectively, if we get through everything and if it gets, the state finalizes everything and this is where we're at, we can't go to July 1st with anything less than that level services without changing something. That's and we can't have promises that, we can go forward needing this and only having this, and somehow or another will fill the hole. We can't do that. That's not, our job is to have a budget that meets the needs for what we're saying we're going to be doing for the whole year, not, having a hole that may or may not get filled in some way that we don't understand. So hopefully things change between now and that point, but if not, hard decisions always have to be made.
Mr. Larson?
I think another one of my concerns, my personal feeling is I think we should go with the urgent needs budget, but that's just me. And even the level service budget really doesn't put us, one of the things that we've been talking about all year in budget and finance, and we've been talking about around this table also, is, some of the events that happened over the course of last summer that, quite honestly, nobody can see coming. But if you have even part of that happen again this summer, which we normally have some happen, there are things that happen over the course of the summer that in a lot of different arenas no one sees coming, no one could predict. And so my concern is that if we're starting a little bit behind right out of the gate, we have some unexpected expenses show up over the summer, that just exasperates a bad situation. And if we're trying to cover a bad situation to start with one-time money, and then new expenses show up, we're definitely on a path.
Yeah, it's honestly no way to, operate a $79 million organization. But, frankly, I don't think the city would prefer this either, right? Because any money that they have to spend on fixing our problems is money they don't have to spend on their other problems. So it's not good for anybody. And it does, I think, regardless of our differences with the city about what our priorities should be and where the money should go, I think it honestly does reflect that the finances in the city are a problem.
Mr. Quinn?
I think, first of all, I think the openness to grant the schools access to free cash, I think is a really positive step. I think that flexibility of thinking from the city side is really welcomed. I am a little concerned that under the right conditions, you or the committee as a whole could end up trying to sing for their supper in case the conditions or a different interpretation of those needs emerge, particularly if you should have been able to anticipate this. And I think it's just naturally human that when things or finances or any sort of pressure gets placed, sometimes our open-mindedness isn't the same as when it's out into the future. So the limitation to the administration of this committee to be able to make, I think Mr. Domenici just mentioned like the flexibility, right, is concerning. Granted, I may look at those cuts and, we all look at things differently. I may say, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think just in principle, it's challenging to accept a premise that would have us trying to pay for needs versus using free cash to move the district forward. It was my experience in seeing free cash was used to enhance the district in ways that you wouldn't necessarily, be able to do otherwise. This sounds like, to me, this is like grabbing for a life raft because we sold the one of the life rafts over for firewood along the way. So that would be my concern in principle to this approach.
Mrs. Gill?
And based on the life raft, if we need that life raft before the end of this fiscal year is done, is that life raft out there for us, or is it only effective next year?
We have a commitment from the city for $150,000, which at this time, there's no reason to believe would not be enough to cover where we would land based on projections today. Although, tomorrow's a different day, and as Mr. Furtado said, you never know. But we did not discuss what would happen if we needed more than 150 this year while in this year. But based on that thinking, I feel that the mayor would want to help. All right, so I just think we need to do a quick accounting of what that $1 million in urgent needs really is.
Yes, when we talk about the urgent needs, we have a series of, we are able to right now project enrollment for most of our grades, and we understand that we've got some issues at some grade levels that are going to require us to add teaching staff to make the class size, reasonable on the high end of our contract limits, but without the added staff, we'd have some real issues in terms of class size. In addition, we've got some scheduling issues at the middle school that's going to require some additional personnel as well, and a couple of teachers at the high school. We need 6 paras, 3 to address special needs supports that, again, we know exist, and 3 for instructional technology integration at the middle schools. 2.5 adjustment counselors, which we've kind of talked about the need for that all year long, and some additional ELL support across the district.
So I think it's important that we talk a little bit about how this particular list fits the priorities that we've set for ourselves.
So you've seen this graphic before, but we continue to focus on learning and providing engaging learning experiences for our students, infusing technology in any point that we can, personalizing our learning programs, as well as providing experiential learning opportunities for our students. Back in December, we had listed out the educational priorities, and educational priority 1 was staff. Number 2 was inclusive practices, and number 3 was instructional technology. And so putting that information that Mr. Furtado presented on that previous slide into those categories, this is exactly that. So educational priority number 1 would be focusing on middle school core subjects, as well as core subjects at the high school to support both class sizes, enrollment, and scheduling needs specifically at the middle school level. For educational priority number 2 for inclusive practices, and this is something that we've talked about throughout the entire school year, focusing on adjustment counselors to support social emotional learning of our students, ELL services to support our newcomers or students that come in with no English at all, or those students who are considered SLIFE, students who have limited or interrupted education for English, and also paraprofessionals to support some of our most needy students in our special education programs. And in educational priority number 3, again, we're looking to continue to support our technology integration in one of our middle schools with the addition of a STEAM teacher, as well as library media paraprofessionals to support the integration of technology in our middle schools.
So to wrap this up, I'd like to summarize in this way. 1, we need to all remember that when you compare Attleboro to similar districts, we lead the pack, right? For communities that face the kind of challenges that we do, we're at the head of the list, and we're doing that by getting more done with less, right? The other comparable communities they face are challenges, including they're not well funded either, but we do a lot with a little, and that's something we should take pride in. And as much as this is a troubling budget process, we will continue to do that, and we will continue to offer the kind of education I think we should all take pride in. I think we serve our kids quite well. But that being said, it is absolutely the case that we have a problem. Now, in any budget process, reasonable people can disagree about how money should be spent and where it should go. And it's not my job to grapple with how the city should balance its needs, right? My job is to explain to you what the implications of funding are and to advocate for the funding that I think that we need for our students, and I think that we've done that. It's not my place to comment on the city's choices. But I will say that from my vantage point in working with the city, I think it's absolutely true that the needs of the school outstrip the city's current ability to fund them. Right? I just think that that's a reality that everyone in this process has to accept, that today, as we sit here, there's no outcome in which we get everything that we need. And that's a reality that is not new to us. It's one that we hope to, continue to work towards getting to a different place. But that's the case, and I think that to say otherwise is not fair. So the bad news on that is that while I really do believe that in any of the scenarios that we're offering, we will find a way to make it work, we are approaching a place in which this all becomes completely unsustainable. The funding the schools at level services or just below level services has a collective impact. And each year that we continue to string this out and to make this work increases the chance that that's the year that it all finally starts to catch up with us, right? We've been dancing for quite some time, and at some point you have to pay the fiddler. And as the superintendent, I have a responsibility to inform the community that this is catching up with us. Our educators are exhausted. Teaching the inclusive class loads that are the result of our class sizes pays a toll. They do not have the same level of supports that other districts have to meet the, both statewide and nationally, growing number of kids who have social emotional needs. So, we've done great work, and I think we have a great foundation here, but if the state doesn't do its part in fixing the funding formula, and if the city doesn't find ways to increase its revenue streams, then this is going to reach a negative conclusion at some point. And I do not wish to ring the alarm bell and say that we're at that point now, because I honestly don't think that we are. But while I want to put everyone's fears at ease to say that we will find a way to get through FY20 regardless of how it plays out, I don't want people to think that this is something they don't need to worry about. It literally keeps me up at night every night, right? We can't keep doing this. This is going to run its course sooner than later. And then the final thing is that we have a responsibility to do what we can to help the situation as well, and we will continue to explore new ways to maximize the investment. We'll look for savings where they exist. We always do. Mr. Rattano does an excellent job of that. We'll try to find ways to move things around to make things work. But as part of our responsibility to do everything we can, we'd like to come back to you with a presentation on school choice. I think we have to reconsider that again. I think that we might be leaving an opportunity to create another revenue stream for ourselves by not participating in school choice. If nothing else, if we could offset some of the dollars that are going out of the city over school choice, that in and of itself would be a win, but I think there's the potential to do even greater good. I know what some of the concerns in the past have been. We're doing some work to try to make the case for why it's worth pursuing. So, these are the kinds of things that I think we have to start considering, because we can't let ourselves get to a place where this all finally comes to a head. So, in terms of next steps, we'll having the public hearing after vacation. What's the date on that?
22nd.
After that, you will need to approve a number that you wish to send to the mayor, and then he will put together his budget and present that to the municipal council, and they will continue with their process, and then we get the number back at some point in late June, and we go from there.
Mr. Larson, did you have a question?
Just more of a comment to back up the superintendent's comments. I mean, from an unsustainable point of view, we're kind of there. I mean, we've been kind of playing with one of our feet in the edge of the water there all year. And we've been talking about it. We know it's there. Mr. Furtado and his staff have been doing a great job of trying to shrink that down. I think, this will be the first time from an operations point of view that I can remember that we've had to go back to the city and basically try to get some more money back from them. So, I mean, I think you're right on, we're right on that edge of unsustainability, because there's a number of factors in our budget, as Mr. Starr says, well over 90% of it is fixed. But there are a number of parts of our budget that become very volatile and very out of our control, and are going to continue to challenge us going forward. So,
Mr. Domenici?
Oh, I agree, because there are two things, you have many things that keep you up at night. Earlier in the evening, we talked about, how great it is to finally be breaking ground on a new high school. I don't think any one of us doesn't worry about what will happen to this high school while the other one's getting built. I mean, it's a matter of time. On top of that, to that point, special education funding is, I don't know how you quantify it. I mean, last year we estimated for a 29% bump with some additional contingency funds in case that wasn't enough, and then we needed about 42% this year, if my numbers are correct. So, and I mean, I put a lot of that on the state because, they haven't kept pace in 26 years, and this stuff is finally coming to roost. I mean, I agree. The city needs to find some new revenues for a lot of reasons, and I think they're trying to do what they can, but I also think this is a very complex budget that unless you're in and out of it, and I've had the ability as the newer member of the budget subcommittee to see it for the last year, it's it really is a juggling act. So, those are things that I think about. So, I ask the questions because I'm curious as to what these recommendations are, and I'd like to see it so I can analyze it myself and kind of understand, like, why are you recommending this? Because again, who knows what happens? We try to do everything we can to get people in place by a certain time, get people registered by a certain time, even transportation by a certain time, and you just never know who's going to come, who's going to be placed here. And to your point, I have a colleague, superintendent, who is a school committee member in Norton and has been preaching the merits of their school choice policies and how much funding that has brought them. So that you brought this up as a potential option is something that piqued my interest because it's something I've been curious about. And, I guess we'll have to see, like you said, to do what we can to explore where we can to try to help ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Until next time, hopefully we'll get some good news from the state or from the city in the intervening time, and we will reconvene that discussion in 2 weeks. Thank you, Mr. Furtado. Is that all you have, Mr. Sawyer?
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. I was waiting for that. Next, we have our minutes from our March 25th, 2019 meeting. The minutes were circulated with your materials. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, consent agenda, just one item tonight. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $276.30 from Custom Inc. to AHS Best Buddies.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That concludes the consent agenda tonight. Next, we have our subcommittee reports. I'll turn it over to you, Mrs. Scales.
Thank you. We started by reviewing several items in Section B of the policy book. Policy BEDH, public participation at school committee meetings, and Exhibit BEDHE1, open forum guidelines, were brought forward for review by the administration. They explained that a recent Superior Court decision regarding the open forum process prompted the review. Our legal counsel spoke to Mass General Counsel, and Mass intends to issue a revised model policy on this subject in the near future, but for now we are proposing the changes you have before you. So a motion to approve the proposed edits to policy BEDH.
So moved.
Second.
Comments?
I just want to say, I think our plan is that when Mass does come out with their new policy,
We
that the
will-
policy subcommittee will revisit it.
Correct.
Possible.
Correct. All right, any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy exhibit BEDHE1.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? And again, we'll do the same with this one. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, reviewed policy BG, policy development. No changes at this time. We're in line with masks, so motion to note the review date on policy BG.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Policy BGB, policy adoption is being aligned with mask with one minor change to reflect our practice of having policies going into effect at the completion of the subsequent school committee meeting. This will ensure that affected persons have an opportunity to become familiar with the requirements of the new policy prior to its implementation. Motion to approve the proposed edits to policy BGB.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Last policy in section B that we reviewed was policy BGC, policy revision and review. The administration recommends aligning with mask. Motion to approve the edits to policy BGC to align with mask.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, we reviewed 3 policies in section A. Legal counsel has reviewed policies AC, non-discrimination, ACA, non-discrimination on the basis of sex, and ACAB, sex and gender-based harassment. We edited some down for repetitive language, and we carefully reviewed and edited what you have before you. So a motion to approve the edits to policy AC.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the recommended edits to policy ACA as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Lastly, motion to approve the recommended edits to policy ACAB.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, we looked at the final item in section C that needed to be reviewed. CBD, superintendent's contract, had minor edits by the administration to reflect the current Attleboro protocol. Motion to approve the edits to policy CBD.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Lastly, we looked at the remaining 5 items to review in section I of the policy book. Both policies, IGF curriculum maintenance and review and IGG curriculum assessment, are both policies from 1991. Mass does not have either policy, and the administration is recommended that they be removed from the policy book. Motion to remove policy IGF from the policy book.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to remove policy IGG from the policy book.
So moved.
Second.
Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The administration also recommended the removal of policies IHBD-BA, in-school SAT review classes, and IKFA, early graduation criteria, as Mass doesn't have either of them. After careful discussion and further questions, we ask that they be placed on the next teaching and learning agenda for discussing and review, and then they'll come back to us. Lastly, we reviewed policy IKFBA, distribution of diplomas. There are no edits to the current policy. Motion to note the review date of policy IKFBA.
So moved.
Second.
A
Comments?
comment?
Yes.
I took a look at this policy, and it does not seem to go along with what we've actually been doing, so I would actually make a motion to amend
Okay.
amend the policy. And it would be to the second paragraph, so it would read, former school committee members and current elected municipal officials may present diplomas to children. Request must be in writing to the chairperson 4 weeks before graduation.
Okay. Have a, that was a
So moved,
motion.
yeah.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We had a lot of discussion in the subcommittee, back and forth about what to do with this. And I agree with that change. I'll open the floor up to see if there's any other comments.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about that exact thing during the policy meeting. And, the thing is, there were 3 or 4 different concerns with this. For, first of all, when it comes to the diplomas, that is something that comes through the powers given to us by the elected, by the city of Attleboro as the governing body of the schools. I think that's where it belongs, with us. I mean, I think it's a great thing that we actually have a policy that allows former school committee members to come back and give it to their own child. I think that's a respect thing for their service to the Attleboro Public Schools. But I think the school committee is where it should stop. Opening it up to others, such as city councilors, mayor, state representatives, et cetera, I don't see the connection. Just for example, I wouldn't expect, if my son was receiving a certificate or an award or something from, say, the municipal council, I wouldn't expect, nor would I feel it appropriate for me to go and request or take on the responsibility of giving that to him. It's not from me and my responsibilities as a school committee member. That would be their award, their certificate, they're giving that to him. I'd be in the audience, I'd be happy, I'd be proud, but there's got to be that difference, because the next question is, where do you draw the line? Do you draw it at administrators? Do you draw it at teachers? Do you draw it at paras? You could try to say elected officials, but school committee is schools, city council, mayor, et cetera, is not schools. So, I think an argument can be made that administrators and principals and paras and custodians and so on is closer to the educational process and the diploma than, say, other elected officials. So we actually had this conversation, and ultimately I think we chose as a committee not to make that change, and I am against changing it. Again, I do like that we do give former school committees that respect, that recognition, and allow them to make that request and do that at the ceremony. But as far as expanding it, I think I'd be against it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
It's been my experience that we have extended that opportunity to city councilors and elected officials. And so I think the policy needs to reflect what we're going to do going forward, and given that we've been doing that, I think just putting that in writing so it's clear to current municipal officials what the rules are, past municipal officials. This is only current elected municipal officials, so there's a clear delineation of who gets that privilege. We are as schools trying to be part of the community and a good community partner, so extending that courtesy to the municipal government, I think is perfectly fair to do. But more importantly, I just think this policy needs to reflect actually what we have been doing as a district, or are going to be doing as a district going forward.
I don't feel particularly strongly about either way to go. I think before I do, I think we need to consider what's the point of this. What's the point of this policy, this exemption? Is it a particular privilege that we're bestowing upon former school committee members? Is that why we're extending it? Is it to create kind of a big tent of participation? Because I think, if past practice is any indication, it's not just hasn't been limited to elected officials. It's been, open up to even a broader spectrum. If I have to lean, and I don't lean particularly strongly, I kind of lean towards a bigger tent because it is a community celebration. I don't know where it gets excessive, to be honest with you. But I'm inclined, until we reach that point, to be more inclusive of people who want to be part of it than we are to exclude those. Although, I am channeling my inner Jonathan Bender, that if one gets to present a diploma, then we'll all get to dispense a diploma. It won't be anarchy. I tend to lean towards being a little bit more inclusive to the point of anarchy.
I think also, I would say, to limit any fears of anarchy, the amendment to the policy right now, while it's more it opens it wider than what the policy reads now. It's actually a little bit less than what I think has been done in the recent past, which is part of the reason why I think we need the policy to reflect the reality, because I don't think there's been a uniformity in what the school committee has and the chairs have allowed in recent school committees. So I think we need to have it in writing. I do think, this does grant more people the right, but it will bring it back from maybe some of the privileges that we've been granted in recent years. So to alleviate any fears of anarchy. Yes.
So just to verify, so what we're really talking about is expanding it to the, say, 20 or so other currently serving elected officials, and it's only while they are currently serving?
Correct.
So, and that would be it?
Yes.
And no other individual would fall under the policy?
Correct.
And that would, moving forward, is how we would...
And to their children, yes.
Only their children, right, okay.
Okay. So, is everybody good with that one? All right, so we have to vote on the amendment.
Do a second. Someone second.
Someone second.
We had a second in order to discuss, right?
So motion to approve the amendment?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, abstain? Okay, motion passes. So motion to approve the policy IKFBA as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, motion passes. Our next meeting will be held on May 13th. We hope to have some job descriptions as well as tackling more of Section B. No, yes. I think, I don't know.
It's late.
It's late.
Thank you, Mr. Scales.
You're welcome.
Mr. Larson?
Just before I do finance and budget subcommittee, I just want, so both of those votes were 7-1?
Yes.
Okay. Interpret anybody else incorrectly. Budget and Finance Committee got together on April 3rd. We discussed much of what we have already discussed this evening, so I will not bore you with a second version of that reality. There is one motion and one item of information that I want to bring forward. The item of information, unless something has changed in the last couple of days, we are still waiting for the carryover funds from last year to come back to us. Is that still correct, Mr. Furtado?
That was modified slightly at the meeting last week, where if they are needed for 19, they will be used. Otherwise, they'll help offset some of the cuts for 20.
So we will not be receiving our carryover money just as we standardly have been for.
No, those funds we're getting back.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess where I'm going is part of our plan to shrink our deficit issue was the assumption that we would be getting our carryover funds back to use towards those expenses.
We're working to not use those funds. As the superintendent reported, we still can't say whether or not we'll need them. They'll be available if they're needed in 19, and if they're not needed in 19, they'll be applied to 20, as we would.
Okay, I'm going to just interrupt you one more time here, because my interpretation of what I think I now heard before was that we would be getting our carryover money back once everything was certified. And I know it was all certified last fall.
Yes.
So somewhere between last fall and now, it should have come back as it historically has, at least for the last 8 years that I've been sitting in one of these chairs. And that the city had also agreed up to $150,000 in addition to our carryover funds. If we needed it to close out this fiscal year, they would keep available to us to help us shrink our deficit issue. Am I mistaken?
Correct. No.
Okay, so we are still waiting for our carry forward from last year.
But we are going to be receiving them one way or the other, correct?
We are going to receive them one way or the other.
When you said using it to offset next year, you're talking about a budgeting decision by the administration to use carryover funds for next year? Or are you saying?
Yeah, as we typically would.
Okay.
So, prepaid tuitions and stuff like that.
Well, just one more, because I know legally, any carryover funds from FY '18 have to be dispersed
Expended by the end of the year.
the FY '19 year.
Correct, yeah.
So,
It's gonna be hairy at the end of the year.
well, I guess I'm also concerned from a timing point of view, and there's no way to land our budget at zero.
No.
So,
You
I
know,
mean, there has to be an existence of either a surplus or a deficit. And we know a deficit isn't going to happen, so consequently, therefore, we have to have some version of a surplus.
That's some good deductive reasoning right there.
I mean, I'm just trying to. So, Mr. Storrs was first. I'll stop talking for a moment.
I got two a question with a follow-up. The first question is, historically, when is the latest, worst case that we've ever gotten the carryover funds?
in my time here, December.
December. Here we are in April. Have we been given a reason why the historic norms have not been followed when it comes to this?
I asked if there was a reason, and I was told that there isn't.
So we have not been given any viable reason why the historic norms of carryover funding haven't been followed.
I believe we were assured that the money's coming our way and that it's just a matter of timing, not.
But you've never seen it later than December? Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Scales.
So in order to meet our budget this year, you have made cuts along the way, and you had shown us the where you were going to make the cuts. And one of them that stands out in my mind was the third quarter middle school after-school programming. So has that been cut?
No, we were directed not to
Okay,
by the school committee.
okay,
So that did not happen.
that did not happen. Did you cut something else in place?
We've, as opposed to, cuts, but it turns out the same way. We've put freezes on spending for non-personnel spending, books, supplies, paper. And we've also either frozen or delayed hiring replacements when positions open up. As for instance, we had a custodian in the high school who retired in January. It's now April, and I just posted for that position.
Okay.
We accumulated, savings in that time, which helped offset the retirement cost to the employee, as well as provide, some savings in that line through the end of the year. So we've done things like that with other positions in the district, just to, again, try to accumulate some space, and have been pretty successful at doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
So there were, if I remember correctly, there were about 5 line items, none of which any of us found preferable. And thus far, you haven't had to go there because of the other measures that you've taken. And then, right, because
We've got exposure in a bunch of places.
right, I just remember you gave us like these 5, like if we had to go this route, these are the 5, and
oh yes,
none of us wanted, nobody wanted to go there, and so it's not just the one line item, right? It's none of those have been.
We haven't formally cut anything
because of other decisions you've made, whether it's holding off on a needed hire for as
Right.
long as humanly possible, or
So I don't know if that's the same. I don't know if there were 2 different lists, a list maybe at subcommittee and then the one that we did at full. But the list that we presented to the full committee, I don't remember how many items were on it. I mean, with the exception of the middle school piece, which you very clearly told us that was not your preference, we've pursued the other ones, whether they were delaying maintenance jobs that weren't critical, or freezing spending, or, I mean, there's all those things. We absolutely have done those things in varying degrees to get us to where we are.
But I also think, and this is, our part is informing the rest of the committee, is that we are still waiting for the mayor to release the carryover from last year, and using that carryover money was part of our solution
Yep.
Yes.
to
And that
closing
was-
this year.
And that was expressed, and again, I was
Yep.
assured that there's no problem, and
Well, Mike, I'm gonna be honest with you, my personal concern is he's going to use the carryover and the 150 that he's also told us we can have as the same money.
That would be problematic.
based
One
on the
person- one
conversations that
person's opinion.
on the based on the conversations I've had with the mayor, I personally would object to that because I know that he knows.
think we all would object to that.
He knows otherwise.
Well, from an accounting perspective, again, the city auditor wouldn't let that happen. That the carryover funds were reported to DESI and the state as expended on the part of the schools, and are therefore part of our net school spending for FY18. So they technically, I mean, anything's possible, but they technically couldn't do that from an accounting perspective because we have credit for that money and we haven't received it yet.
Well, I'll just say that I hope I'm wrong. Mr. Withers.
What's involved in them turning the money over at this point?
Bringing it to council for a vote.
It's a council vote. That's a vote.
All right, I mean, can I request that, one of you reach out to the city again and ask that they?
We did.
Okay.
I expect it to happen soon.
Okay.
Dave?
Since we know the 30,000's there and it's good in faith, is there any reason why we just couldn't spend it?
I mean, in some ways of looking at it, we have.
Okay, so then, I mean,
Well, we've spent it, we've also spent the money on the utilities on a school that we tried to get rid of last fall, and that didn't quite go as planned either, so, we could spend the rest of the night, and I was hoping not to, so I'm gonna cut this conversation off because I think we all know where it's gonna go. We do have one motion coming forward from the, Finance and Budget Subcommittee. Motion to approve the posting of public hearing for the FY 2020 budget on April 22nd, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
For the committee's benefit, that's the level service budget, the $78.6 million.
What if we don't want that?
Why is that the number that's getting presented?
That has been the budget we have historically advertised.
It's not.
That is not that's not a formal decision by the school committee.
In past years, you have submitted a budget to the city that was higher than that number.
Yeah. It's simply to allow for public discussion on the budget.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
The time will be 7 PM on that?
I don't have the timetable posting in front of me.
6:45.
Usually it's
6:45.
6:45.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That is the extent of my report.
Can I ask, I'm sorry, quick one, since you brought it up. So, since you brought up the turning over of the school, do we have an update on where we're at with that from the last motion that we made?
I have nothing to report.
So I was hoping somebody over there might.
It was sent down to the city council.
Okay, and so that's.
I know they had a meeting, I think it got sent to committee, I believe.
So it's still.
The subcommittee.
Okay, so it's still in subcommittee at this time. That's what I was looking for.
But
Action is finally
action
happening.
is
That's what I was looking
yes.
for.
It's a turtle race.
Open forum, is there anyone who'd like to address the school committee at open forum? Mr. Singer? No? Okay. I'll close open forum. That's it, so entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I get it.
Good night, everyone.
But really, you know, if the testing was done sooner, it only is a problem because the kids are taking it seriously and it's